Chapter 3, The Daily Life of the Monks, Part 3. 4. The Cloister. Out of the nave, near the south transept, a door opens into the cloister. At the corner, where nave and transept met, is the pedestal which held a bowl for holy water. Here the brothers stopped to dip their fingers and sign their foreheads with the sign of the cross. The green cloister court without had a porch about it on its four sides, and these covered places, whose width is now indicated by the grading of the turf, were called walks. In the west walk, against the cellarium wall, sat the novices busy with their books, studying church music and grammar and theology. Apt students, when they became monks, were sometimes sent to complete their education at Oxford, where they lived in the Cistercian Abbey of Beaulieu, founded in 1280, or in the Cistercian College of St. Bernard, now St. John's, founded in 1432. There they learned to preach and teach some simple theology to the novices who succeeded them. There they learned also to interpret and apply the canon law. They became the lawyers of the monastery. It is likely that Fountains, like other great houses, maintained a grammar school for the sons of the neighbors. The master of such a school would not be a monk, but a secular person, employed by the abbey, but not a member of the family. The schoolhouse has not been identified. The building which once stood across the river at the south end of the cellarium would have been conveniently placed for this purpose. A glimpse of the discipline of such a school is had in the fact that, in the 16th century, a schoolmaster, receiving his degree of Bachelor of Arts, was presented with a birch as a symbol of his office, and was required forthwith, in the presence of his examiners, to flog a boy hired for that exercise. Over the roof of the east walk, a line of windows opened out of the dormitory. This was a long room with 2 rows of beds from end to end, like a ward in a hospital. The beds were provided with sheets of linsey-woolsey, and the monks lay on straw which was emptied out of its blue ticking and renewed once every year. At Durham, the custom was to carry his blue bed to the brother's funeral and hold it as a canopy over the grave during the service, so that every night when he lay down to rest he was profitably reminded of his last sleep. The monks laid aside their scapulars, but slept in their woolen cassocks, so that they woke ready dressed. The day stairs to the dormitory are in the southeast corner of the cloister. There was a room at the head of the stairs, extending south to the end of the dormitory, which may have corresponded to the master's chamber in a like position in a school. Here the prior may have slept, with an attentive ear for any breach of order. It is uncertain whether there were partitions between the beds, or whether the brethren were denied even such scanty privacy as that. It is plain that they had no cells. The building which opened at right angles with the dormitory beside the river was the toilet room, the necessarium. Through its hall communication was had with the abbot's lodgings. The abbot, according to rule, must sleep in the common dormitory. He probably gave this regulation a liberal interpretation as the house grew great, and considered that this hall made his room constructively a part of the chamber of the monks. At 2 o'clock in the morning a great bell rang in the tower, and a little bell in the dormitory answered it. Then every brother bestirred himself. He threw a cloak about him, thrust his feet into his shoes, and descended the night stairs at the end of the room into the dark church. The night service, called matins, consisted of a reading of many lessons and a chanting of many psalms, and was performed to the accompaniment of the organ. A light burned before the high altar, and there was a light in the loft at the organ, and another for the reader at the lectern, perhaps still another at the chant book of the precentor. But otherwise the great church was in darkness. The psalms were sung from memory. Now and then someone went about among the singing brothers to make sure that no man slept. This lasted for an hour or more. After this service, the monks came out into the north walk of the cloister, where cressets flamed uncertainly against the walls, and there continued until dawn, reading or meditating, but having their hoods well pulled back from their faces to make it evident that they were wide awake. This study hour was, of course, short in summer, but long in winter. When the weather was very bad, they sought refuge in the chapter house. In some cloisters there was glass in the open stonework of the porch, but at best this was a cold place of an early morning. The dormitory was cold, the church was cold, and the cloister was as cold as the sky, but they were used to it, like all their neighbors. This north walk was the living room and study of the monastery. The books in most frequent use were kept in a case which stood in a shallow recess still to be seen in the transept wall. Others were stored in 2 capacious closets on either side of the chapter house door. Every year, at the beginning of Lent, all the books of the monastery were spread out on a carpet on the floor of the chapter house, and a general accounting was had. A roll was called of brothers and of books. Each monk rose at the sound of his name, produced the book which had been assigned to him the year before, and returned it, humbly confessing if he had not read it through. Then the books were newly distributed and charged. At Ripley Castle, bound in an octavo volume, are several of the Fountains books, a Latin grammar, some sermons and some music, and a paraphrase of Ovid, in which that irresponsible writer is made to serve as a medieval moralist. There is also a fragment of a book on medicine, to which they might profitably have added, as at Moe Abbey, a book on eating, De Edendo. No catalogue remains, but we can guess at the titles from the lists of other medieval libraries. There were writings of the Fathers, ancient and modern, with a pretty full set of the works of St. Bernard, and several commentaries on the Bible, and a good deal of biography, mostly ecclesiastical, and books on law and ritual. So the brethren sat in the cold cloister reading their good books. The Benedictines, who were scholars and literary persons, provided by rule that these precious manuscript volumes should be handled with becoming care. Quote, "When the religious are engaged in reading in cloister or church, they shall, if possible, hold the books in their left hands, wrapped in the sleeve of their tunics, and resting on their knees." End quote.